because so much of life is accidental. So it's kind of hard to claim credit for things that you really didn't start out to do and that happen on the way. But some very good things happen. And one of the very good things that happened to me on the way was the discovery that there was unpublished material not published in book form by the Flaherty, and I had to kind of wait at the time to go for it, in fact, to chase it, because I had to chase it. I've done a bit of work on preparing the talk. I'm not quite sure what exactly it is about. It's kind of about Liam O'Flaherty's books, and Liam O'Flaherty, and me, and Wolfhound Press, and publishing, and small publishing. The driving energy of it is I suppose, Liam O'Flaherty. And so if you go with me for a while, I just changed my beginnings a while ago when looking at it, because there are several ways to start and several directions to go. So I really re-shifted where I was going to go. I do have a particular belief in giving credit, in fully crediting. So I want to begin, and that's why you really have the leaflet I give out. I want to begin by reading Liam O'Flaherty. And since I won't really be covering anything in Irish particularly, other than maybe a passing reference to the dual and its huge importance in the Irish language, to Irish language writing, and to actually history of Ireland. I thought I'd begin by reading Nablaha Traga, which is a poem by Liam, and it's a poem that's about the flowers actually at one particular end of the island, which was a favourite haunt of O'Flaherty's himself, and they described it as his sacred space, and it is where his ashes were scattered by Pegeen sometime after his death. So I'll begin with that, Nablaha Traga in Liam O'Flaherty. And for anybody who doesn't have Irish, you probably all have Irish, do you? Don't know. Did I say something there about it? I thought I did. Yes, I do. That the flowers, he tells the flowers they've chosen an odd place to bloom, or to blossom, enduring the droppings of the buds and the winds from the sea, and clinging to the brink of the cliff. A place that's foggy and torn by waves where the sun doesn't shine from Monday to Sunday. To Saturday to put a sparkle on them, and the flowers reply that they don't mind. They're under the voice and the spell of the music of the sea. As gorgeous, it's just a lovely piece. I don't melish na blaha, nach suruk an art of furshiv live ag den of air. Chanta Susan Shaw, the brook na hala, gan fui vach an cluckloss, ag a salakar na name. Oid brodach, lawn the cure and his farget kaita. Ní Scotland green an seo ó luan go saham le glunder a curarib. A dúirt le Blaha Traga. Is cummeling a store, Tommy fi drift, a cure na farga. And it's just a beautiful poem. Beautiful poem. It really should be translated and put, well, maybe that's not right, maybe translations are very odd and difficult thing, and you never get the same poem as a new poem. So I begin with that, and then go to Jame's restaurant in Dublin. I don't know if you've heard of Jame's restaurant in Dublin or not, but in Vogue magazine in 1928 described Jame's as one of Europe's finest restaurants, saying it was crowded with gourmets and wits, and praising the grouse in particular. The literati drank here figures like Liam O'Flaherty and Sean O'Sullivan, said Con Macamara in a memoir of Louis Jamet. Louis's wife Yvonne had a reputation of her own as an excellent painter and sculptor, and is a member of the avant-garde painters group the White Stag, who were very important in Dublin. W.B. Yeats had his own table in Jamet's, and on March 6, 1943, he dined in the restaurant's Blue Room with fellow writers Brinsley McNamara, James Stephens, Lennox Robinson, F.R. Higgins, Seamus O'Sullivan, Padre O'Donnell, Francis Stewart, Frank O'Connor, Miss Somerville, J.M. Hone, and Walter Starkey. And O'Flaherty was probably the South Americans. So Liam had no problem dining and actually turning all the eggs in Jamet's. Ulick O'Connor told me that like James was the fashion centre for the literary, the political, the diplomatic, the economic, the social, and hypocritical, as well as the culinary. Ulick O'Connor says that Liam turned up at James at random, came in, and a table would be found for him. Right? But that when he came in, he would stride right through it, tall, confident, poised, strong, the most handsome man in the world. He said everybody recognized that. I think that's good. On the other hand, in 1929, Liam had nowhere to write The Return of the Brute. So he persuaded his publisher, Mandrake, who was a small publisher in London, to give him a room overhead, and that's where he sat down and wrote it. In a sense, that's kind of the man and the writer, the war survivor, a powerhouse of forward momentum, in spite, and it's always forgotten, in spite of the acute melancholia he suffered as a consequence of really serious shell shock in the trenches of World War I. And somebody said, quite interestingly, that our three great male short story writers, Frank O'Connor, Sean Whelan, and Liam O'Flaherty, all came from the horrors of war. Liam from the trenches in Flanders and wherever else it was. Frank O'Connor and Sean Whelan from the Civil War in Ireland. And that's a really interesting thing. Now mind you, Mary Lavin didn't, you know, but it's very interesting that, and I think it probably is something that does need to be remembered in terms of how they write and what they write. I recently was doing a workshop with 15-year-olds in Monaghan, St. McCartney's College, with 15 boys, and none of them had ever heard of Liam O'Flaherty. So I read them two short stories, The Sniper and The Cow's Death, and they were just blown away with the stories. So there's a beautiful artist sort of at the heart of Liam O'Flaherty. And there's a sense that I get of an understanding of him, or that I did get of an understanding of him, that he's, you know, the masculine writer, the male writer. That's true, and it's untrue. He's a muscular writer, without question, a muscular writer. But, and I came across an article, the title is terrible. It's, the title is Erotic Deterritorializations in the traveller fiction of Liam O'Flaherty and Alicia Gibna. Now, it's really fantastic that this kind of stuff is being done and being written, right? And that academics are getting down to looking at this, right? And writing, this man is Adam Lawrence, I have no idea who he is, I didn't have time to figure it out. But it's a 20-page article, right? Scholarly article looking at erotic deterritorializations in traveller fiction of Liam O'Flaherty. Now, I didn't have time to analyze it, but it was worth, I thought, reading a paragraph from it, right? Because it connects with the first book I published of O'Flaherty. O'Flaherty's stories feature nomadic figures that struggle against bigoted settled folk who, failing to impede mobility, hope to delegitimize travelling as a way of life. In The Tramp, 1947, and The Tent, 26, especially, travelling lifestyle is depicted as an alternative form of masculinity, one which settled men find both appealing and intimidating. While The Tramp of the first tale rejects marital ties altogether, The Tinker of the second tale rejects the restriction of merely one marriage partner. In The Peddler's Revenge, 1976, well, that's, you see, not the right date for the story. That's the date I published. Right? So that's kind of a little slip on the part of the writer. Who was going from the book, that's his source, right? O'Flaherty presents the declining of the peddling trade as a form of social impotence, but unlike the older generations of tramps and tinkers, the peddler does not depend upon distinct physical power or an outward sexual appeal to find his escape routes. Rather, he seeks to displace the authorial voice of the patriarchy through an uncouth subversion of settled communal law. While the male travellers in all three of these tales are disparaged for their loose morals and their association with the workless class, their sensuous, these are words in quotes, sensuous, languid, womanish, graceful, and animal attributes blur the socio-sexual boundaries sedentary males seek to impose. Now, I love where this is going, right? And I love the way it's looking at the writing, because it's saying something about O'Flaherty that tends to get missed, I think, and that is about the sort of the sensual beauty of his writing. And it is through all of his writing. It's through the horrors of war. It's through the ecstasy of Angus. It's there in famine. And that's quite an extraordinary thing. So that was the second place I wanted to make another comment out from something written again recently, which is good to see also, and this time it's by Ruth W. Edwards. And it's an essay called Irish Crime Writing in the 21st Century. Which is interesting. But her final paragraph is valuable. O'Flaherty was an uneven writer, but never unimportant. His Dublin thrillers would probably not work for many modern readers, but they are still of interest to those who want to smell the Dublin underworld as it was in the 1920s, or gain insights into the unintended consequences of revolution. Like such writers as Jean Kerrigan and Declan Hughes, who peer under the stones of contemporary Dublin, O'Flaherty used a new but unfashionable vehicle to go where respectable novelists feared to tread. He deserves respect as the father of the Irish psychological thriller. Irish crime writers should find some way of honouring him. Now that's also very interesting, right? Because that's going to another element in what O'Flaherty was doing. And though the novels are really strong, and some of them very, very important novels, the short stories, I think, are ultimately the O'Flaherty. It's in the short story he kind of really blossoms and excels. The novels will always seem to carry some kind of element of question. But I'm not a literary critic, right? I'm a publisher, and that's a very different thing to a literary critic, right, or to a literary analyst. If I'm reading work, I'm reading it with a purpose. If I'm looking at something, I'm looking for a way to publish it. Is there a place in the market for it? So I worked, where did I come to O'Flaherty from? I worked in a company called Irish University Press in Dublin, which was founded in 1968 by people with lots of money and only some sense. But they had great ideas, they had really great ideas, and it was an absolutely powerhouse of learning for publishing in Ireland, and it became an internationally reputable and highly regarded publishing house. And it published some close to 2,000 volumes in its short life, right? I mean, it took the huge scope of going for a 1,000 volume set of 19th century British parliamentary papers, each one 600 or 700 pages, folio-sized volumes, bound in Morocco and Buckram, fine quality stuff. Everything was the best of quality, specially made paper, printing house in Shannon and so on. That was where I learned my publishing and got the opportunity to read it on it. It was fantastic. And it was while I was there, we were planning on doing academic titles on Irish literature, and then the company collapsed in 1974. So I was made redundant. But part of the titles I was working with were the novels of Liam O'Flaherty by Patrick Sheeran, and Liam O'Flaherty, the storyteller, by Angeline Hampton, who writes as A.A. Kelly. A.A. Kelly's father was Paddy Kelly, a drinking, gambling companion of Liam O'Flaherty, right, in London. So she had that kind of connection. I was with Irish University Press from 68 to 74 when it died a death. What happened was in the UK a rent freeze was introduced. The multi-millionaire who owned IUP, Cahill's, Fallon's, half a dozen other Irish printing and publishing companies was put into receivership by the banks, and we were made redundant. But yeah, so we were returning manuscripts that had no hope of being published or anything, and those two were ones I was responsible for returning. But I had already begun to think about setting up as a publisher as Wolfhound myself. and don't ask me really where that came from. There's no business in my background at all. I was a teacher. I got into publishing by accident. So most of the things like happen by accident. Don't really look at it. You know. If there's luck, you make it. If there's bad luck, you make it. It's, you know, things just move and shape and find a way, and you're there and you work your way through it. I came across a book called Proverbs and Sayings of Jamaica while I was in Irish University Press, because we had a big reprint section, and that was a book I decided we could reprint, and we had sales connection with Jamaica, and there was a company there called Censors, so we were able to produce the book in Ireland, sell a small quantity in Ireland and England, but sell 3,000 copies to Censors in Jamaica, so that justified the publication. But when I did that, I was looking around and said, well, I must go and find a book of Irish proverbs. There wasn't one to be found. They were in Irish. Shanachal Connacht, Shanachal Moon, Shanachal Ola, you know, big, fine academic scholarly volumes in Irish, all in Irish it was, so nobody was buying them or reading them in their own language. So I decided there was room to do a book of proverbs in Irish proverbs in English. And myself and a colleague did that in 1974 and published it in 1974 as the first book in Wolfhound Press. That book has only been out of print for the past 5 years, maybe 7 years, since I ceased to be involved with Irish with Wolfhound Press. And this year, 2015, the Aran Press have reissued it in a new format, right? And when Eason's did their millennial sort of 100 best books, or the best-selling books of the century or whatever, Proverbs and Sayings was among those, right? So it did really very, very well. That was how Wolfhound began. That was 1974, the year I got married. The year I lost my job, got married, published that book, and published a second book, a study of the poetry of Thomas Kinsella by Maurice Harman. And that's after a long connection with Maurice Harman, who was the leading Anglo-Irish study scholar of the time. The following year, we published one book, the Wolfhound Book of Irish Poems for Young People, because the government had introduced, this is kind of irrelevant, because the government had introduced PRSI, it meant that for my first year of redundancy, I got half my salary. It was an extraordinary situation, right? I mean, I was living in luxury, essentially, with no work to do. So I spent 6 months of that time in the District Library and the National Library, and I read every book of poems any Irish poet ever had, down to those libraries, and made that selection, and then got in touch with somebody else, a woman in Carysford, kind of come in with me because I needed the evaluation in terms of children. I was just doing it on my own instead. And that book was still in print until probably still is maybe in print, I'm not even sure where that's it. But it was a very fine book. And then we were a small press. I thought it was kind of unique, you know, being a publisher in Dublin. And I encountered somebody else in '74 as well in a bookshop, and we looked at each other and said, well, who are you? And who are you? He was Michael O'Brien, and he said to me, what are you doing? And I said, I'm Stockley Publishing House. I said, oh, so am I. So we both began sort of. He had a bit of a publishing connection with his father, background with his father, who was a poet. And he's going very, very strong, and is actually one of the country's finest publishers, right? Without question, very, very good publisher. But in fact, I discovered 10 years later that there was nothing unique. No, well, perhaps they would have something to say about that. It's not okay, that's terrible.
Do you want to put it aside and just...
But it will stay there.
Yeah.
Talk to me afterwards. It was lovely, it was gorgeous, yes. Where was I? I was at
O'Brien Press. 10 years afterwards?
Oh yes, 10 years afterwards I discovered that actually in every country in the Western world, people like myself had started small publishing businesses. It was really kind of something that was inevitable outcome of the education levels of the 1960s. And when I was reading the manuscripts of the studies of O'Flaherty's novels and short stories, both of them had referred to something that triggered the publishing instinct. The Wilderness had been published as serialized as a novel in The Humanist in 1927, but never published in book form. And Paddy Hampton, as I know her, A.A. Kelly, had talked about 22 to 28 short stories that really ought to be collected that were never in book form. So both of those sort of triggered responses in me. I wrote letters to both of them. Unfortunately, the Liam O'Flaherty storyteller had already gone to Macmillan. She had moved very quickly, but Pat Shuren's study of the novels was still there. And it was A.A. Kelly who had been in touch with Kitty and Liam O'Flaherty that put me in touch with them. Now, I lived in a Mews flat. We didn't call them apartments then. In a Mews flat in Dublin with a very elegant address, but the building wasn't quite as elegant as the Mountjoy Square or as the Merrion Square offices of Irish University Press. This was 19C Garvel Road, Rathgar, and I sat down and tried to write a bit of a description of it because it's highly relevant to where I and Wolfhound Press came from, and actually really it connects well with where Liam O'Flaherty came from. It's an urban version of something. Shabby, even shoddy, outside the front small door facing a 300-foot long narrow concrete surface laneway. It was originally the site of a proper mews, with raw block walls on both sides and straggling foliage, ivy, overgrown trees. Immediately outside the front door, there was a 2 or 3 inch step that was only noticeable when the door opened and you took a step to go in, so everybody tripped on their way in. Inside the door, there was a sunken rectangle which was intended to have a 2 or 3 inch thick mat in it for wet boots and so on, but never had because we didn't put a mat in it, and people got a second stumble there. Inside the door was a stairway to the loft, which was the living part of it, right? And the stairway had carpeting that was maybe 40, 50 years old. And it looked like it, and it was like it. Upstairs the loft was living room and office space, a fireplace, some laser-board chairs, a table to work at, 2 bedrooms, a main one which was reasonable, and a tiny sort of 4-foot wide one. A small floor-level window faced up the laneway by the table, the piece de resistance, French doors to a balcony. The balcony was the unsteady, felt flat roof of an extension, which was actually for the landlord's engineering workshop, equipped with a couple of lathes and a lot of junk. I did go out in it once or twice to sunbathe in the summer, but it would sway. Yet the landlord told me it hosted rugby teams in its day, so it wouldn't collapse. His name was Mr. Hogan. I always knew him as Mr. Hogan. I think it was Eddie Hogan. He was of average height, thin rather than slim, slight build. He gave the appearance of being somewhat stooped, even though he wasn't. He lived in the same premises on the ground floor, in a room he used as living room and bedroom combined. It was 4'6" wide, definitely not 5 foot wide, and definitely not longer than 10 foot long. Right? He lived a frugal life. It was a monk's cell, a box room space with a bathroom and cooking corner beside it. There was a small garage at the side as well. He owned a white van. He cut the top off it and increased it with wooden sort of stays and struts, and put little windows in it, and he turned it into a camper van with a gas cooker, chair and table and stuff, because he was basically from Tipperary, and he was trying to make his way, having come from Canada back to Ireland, make his way ultimately back home where he was trying to build a house. Why give this detail? Because that was Dublin in the 1970s, and there's nothing like this in Dublin now. It doesn't exist anymore. Also, Mr. Hogan struck me as a character, like a character out of Dickens. So that gave me kind of a literary sort of connection in my mind. But later I would begin to think of him as Liam O'Flaherty's the fanatic, who was also, in fact, going to America and back, so on, right? He was an returned immigrant of diaspora. Hogan bought the Muse and reconstructed it from found materials in dumps and skips and so on. Hardboard sheets, second-hand paint that had already painted something else it looked like. But it was very bohemian, and it was a great place, right? And that was Wolfhound Press. It actually once hosted, it was Irish University Press for a few days too. It once hosted about 7 or 8 of us doing an emergency editing job that we had to do, and we had to get out of the office to do so well, we all came out to do it, right? Hogan was a wonderful man at the same time. He would like to come up for conversation because he liked to hear about what was going on in Dublin. He was living there himself as well. He invented model windmills, but didn't know how to take them any further. He was a great character. He was building a house to go home, and of course anything he built was flawed, seriously flawed, and this was flawed, and the wall fell in himself and kept it. Really was sad. He was a wonderful man. I had to increase the rent on him, right? I had to sort of find a way of increasing the rent. Now, those characters are alive all over Ling of Love, these stories, right? All over. Anyhow, Wolfhound began from there, and I made wrote to Kitty via A. Kelly, and unexpectedly, the taxi arrived up outside my front door, and this very elegant, tall, slim, clearly very rich, well-dressed, expensively dressed, but very fragile lady stood at the front door when I opened the door. And while I maybe half thought maybe this is Mrs. Taylor, I wasn't sure, and said yes. And she said, I'm here about dinner Friday. So I semi-panicked, opened the door back, and she stumbled. And stumbled in the second one, and then on the stairway up, she kind of was very slow, and I was going up behind her, and I was saying, that's the end of that. We talked for a while. I'm fairly open and frank, and I don't need to sort of pretend that I am anything other than what I am, and I think she appreciated that. I wasn't talking fancy language. I wasn't offering anything. I told her I didn't have any money to pay big advances, but I would pay some advance, right? And that I wanted to publish these stories because they should be published. I mean, that's what my belief was. These should be published, no question about it. And they would be published by somebody. But A. Kelly would put them together, and I could publish them here in Dublin. And so we talked for a while, and then she sort of said she had to go, and the taxi was still waiting downstairs. And I probably, I don't know if I offered her, I'm not sure I would even have had the courage to offer her a cup of tea. I would have had to go downstairs, boil the kettle, come back up. I can't really remember. But she said she'd get in touch. And about a week later, I got a letter inviting me to come and meet Lee. And that was the first time I met Lee in his apartment in Wilton House, Wilton Terrace, beside the canal and Bagot Street Bridge. This, now, I must tell you that I had not read any of Liam O'Flaherty's novels before this. No, not even Famine. I knew about them, I'd read short stories, but I hadn't read the novels. So I was going in with a little bit of trepidation maybe as to what I would be like. Liam and I got on well. He recognized instantly that he had somebody who would put his books, he would put this book into print anyhow, and nobody else was offering or bothering about it, right? And that's the way it was for him, right? He was in very good form, very good shape. I had been told, because I had asked around Dublin's literary scene, you know, I mentioned that I was hoping to meet O'Flaherty, and I was actually told by a friend, Liam O'Flaherty is a dangerous man. It's a fact. These were the words used. And well, he wasn't. He really wasn't. Not at this stage, anyhow. But he was aware of what the possibility was of getting this volume published. No question about that. He saw that this was a real bonus for him. And for me, it was a far bigger bonus, because this would give Wolfhound Press a reputation merely by having O'Flaherty's name connected with the press. So So I mean, there was that business side of it from my point of view, very clearly, right? And I knew that that benefit was there for me. What I didn't know was that I could go on from this first book to do, I forget how many now, but quite a lot. I made a list. The list you have there, right, has got the dates, and you can see the years that we didn't publish it by Aran Islander between 1976 and 2000. I mean, there's a lot of material there. And I hadn't ever put it together like this before until now, and I'm really delighted at what I've done, right, just for myself, but this is what actually has happened. It's quite wonderful. But Liam offered me all of his books that first lesson. You do them all, because Peters is no good. And Peters was A.D. Peters, the agency in London, right? And Kitty wavered a little, was a bit hesitant about that, but only half so. And I said, no, I can't guarantee that I could publish them. So what I asked him for was the first option on any book that went out of print, or that was out of print was available. And that proved to be quite a wise thing to have done, because as the years went on, I published 1, 2, 3, 4 books, 5 books, and Famine had never gone out of print. It had always been there, and it was the one I would love to have got, and The Informer was the other one. And then I got word from a bookseller maybe that somebody was bringing out Famine in England, and I was quite concerned. So I got on to the agent and said, I believe Famine is coming out from somebody said. No, I hadn't been dealing with the agents really at all in the meantime. I was dealing with Liam, the contracts with Liam. That's what he wanted. And Kitty was quite happy with it as well. But the agents didn't know because they sent copies of the contracts to the agent. The agent, I think, had sent out notice about Famine to British publishers, but didn't even think about it. And that was not an uncommon happening from the British point of view. Because they wanted to publish, they wanted books in Ireland, they wanted Irish books, there was a good market there. So fortunately I had that option clause written into the first contract on the Peddler's Revenge. So I was able to say, look, sorry, I have an option on this, so and I want to take it up, and I intend taking it up, etc., etc. And it turned out that the guy in England, the publisher in England who had taken it was in fact a friend of mine, called Colin Smythe, a very good academic publisher, publishing a lot of Irish materials, in fact. So Colin had got the offer and took it up. So I rang him and said, Colin, what are you doing? You know, I'm doing what's lawful, I've kind of been doing all this and I intend to carry on, you know. And I have this option which I will, you know, impose if you don't want to surrender. So he had no problem surrendering it, actually. He recognized that that was where it should go. And that was a good thing to have done. So that meant that I was able to continue publishing the books. I learned a lot on the publishing of The Peddler's Revenge. I mean, for instance, I learned not to trust some people that would expect to be trusted. The book was launched in the Arts Council offices on his 80th birthday, 28th of August 1976. And Liam was there with Podrigo Concannon, is it? Was yeah. Liam and him, Podrigo, were very close. And who else? But all the academics and the literati were there, right? And I had asked the Arts Council if I could sell copies of the book. That was the first edition. If I could sell copies of the book, and no, you can't sell books in the Arts Council. May not sell, but you can go and publish them, but you can't sell, and we launch them and take the credit, but you can't sell them, right? And I was quite taken aback, but that was the way they were. And so I said, well, can I display copies? I said, oh yes, you can display copies. So in my innocence, I brought in 12 to 15 copies of the book and put them up around the place so that people could look at them and feel them and so on. Do you know that there wasn't one copy left after the launch was over? And Liam had signed every one of them for the people that came up to him to sign, right? These are the academics from UCD and Trinity and the bloody writer of the lot. I was furious, right? Because every copy was, you know, important. So that was a good lesson, I think, a good I probably have the habit myself of assuming the book is there, you know, you can almost take it. So that was the that was the other lesson. I don't think they've changed either, which is a bit stupid, to be honest, and arrogant, and just thick. The second book I did was Skerrit, and Skerrit I love. It's just a great, great book. But the one, I suppose, in a sense, I'm almost prouder of having published The Wilderness. And it's maybe that novel is more closer to kind of me and to my way of thinking and so on than some of the others. But The Wilderness is a great, great book. Just a wonderful piece of writing. And so we did that, did a signed limited edition of it. I think I brought a copy of it here just to show it. It looks a bit off, and there's one unfortunate thing. I didn't know that the papers we were printing with in Ireland at the time wasn't exactly the best papers. They wasn't acid free, right? But that's the design, which is mine. I came up with it. Red was Liam's favourite colour, and it's not wonderfully big glue even on this stuff. It's come through it after forever many years, right? But it's on good. It's got on heavy paper, and we got some illustration, which I really liked. Right? They kind of captured the mood of the story, the characterization of the story, and so on. Right? Really, really very good. Jeanette Dunn. Yeah. I tried to get his name Fitzpatrick. He was heading off to America the day I rang him, so it didn't get to meet him. That's Liam and his goat, the cottage in Dublin Mountains. I had also done a limited edition of The Pedlar's Revenge, very nice one, and the paper on that one was quite nice. But nicely bound, hand-tied, and I knew the binders as well. These were kind of done for two reasons. One, they would sell, and they did. But secondly, to kind of mark a significance. And that now I've kind of half lost that track again there. The Wilderness is very important for me. And 1978, The Ecstasy of Angus. Now Liam knew that virtually off by heart. I mean, I would visit him quite a lot, and go over and spend maybe 2 or 3 hours there. And it would involve reading stories, talking about him and his time and the war. And he'd start singing Lily Mowlane in Irish. Shasta and singing with the Lily Trade. Dut Melatic Delegain, Garame Feigning, Rala Feigning, Lily Lampa, Lily and Mowlane. And he had 3 or 4 vessels, right? And he was not singing that. And The Ecstasy of Angus is just one of those wonderful books that kind of connects with Irish mythology, folklore, and the 20th century. And he does it in such a fine, fine way. That one is illustrated as well by a woman called Lucy Kilroy, and A. Kilroy wrote an afterword for it. Famine had a long gestation, and Liam was travelling around Europe when working on that. In March 1933, from Toledo, he wrote to the agent that he had decided to try writing his book there because he was the only foreigner in town at the moment, and as I speak no Spanish, I'm having a monastic time. Next month he was in Cornwall writing to France, and he was dealing with famine and hoping to do big things with it, but didn't expect to finish it before September. In Finisterre in July, he was in such sort of bad straits that he wrote to the agent again, I felt in a frightful mood and rather like committing suicide. However, having slept over the idea changed my mind, so we must carry on as we have responsibilities. Why, God only knows. Can you persuade any editor to let me do some articles at any price? I must find some means of tiding over the present. considering I can hardly get enough to pay for the typing from short stories. So I'm going on with my novel, Famine, damned a thing. I had 50,000 words written and had to scrap them. I'm writing to Galway about it. That was in July. The reader who got it for the publisher to report said, the opening of the book is brilliant, the older Flaherty at its best. The one weakness, Strong thought, was that an essentially lyric talent had tackled an essentially epic theme. This is the reader's report. A shorter book of 70,000 words, Famine is about 120,000. With greater focus and intensity, would perfectly suited towards Flaherty's talent, would have produced a great novel instead of a long novel with many passages of great writing. Yet, Strong ended his report doubting his own judgment. I have great admiration for Flaherty's work, and was much stirred and moved by this manuscript, on which, I repeat, I have been unduly severe, but only because it falls short of greatness. So I was really very, very happy 53 years later to read in his review of my edition of Famine, Wolfhound edition of Famine in 1979, Anthony Burgess, not an Irish writer, but somebody else, able to say of it that he readily accepted the statement on the cover of this book that Famine is a major achievement, a masterpiece, and adds one of the great novels of this century. And that would tend to be the view, I think, still of Famine. He wrote it though in a lot of places, and I have a tear sheet out of a copy of first edition of Famine, of the title page, in which he wrote to Kitty, for Kitty, and we writing it together, travelling in, and he names, where do I have the list of names? Costa, page 88. He write the names of the islands on which they were when they were writing it. Page 88. Yes, this is Kitty's book in memory of Jamaica, Marlow, Martinique, Greenwich Village, Guitary, Paris, where we wrote it, from Riley. And he often called himself Riley. So that was there. At the time, the American publishers thought it was too dark a book. You can't kind of do anything much with Famine, and the idea of making film, because it was presented to Hollywood and so on, it was too depressing a subject for a film. I got exactly the same response 50 years later. Too depressing a subject for American audiences, which I don't get, really. I don't get at all. In 1981, The Black Soul was banned. And, oh no, it was the Puritan. It was the Puritan, sorry, in 1931, the Puritan was banned. And I was really amazed to come across this reference, right? Like Liam had books banned readily. I mean, a book by Liam Flaherty, ban it. And I don't understand really, it's hard to understand why this happened to so many authors. I mean, the mindset that was doing this is extraordinary. They tried to cage everything. But W.B. Yeats wrote an article in the Manchester Guardian on 24th of August 1932, after hearing about the prohibition of the banning of the Puritan. The prohibition of Mr. O'Flaherty's The Puritan is a prohibition of a novel which may grow into the importance of Maria Edgeworth's Absentee. Synge began the deepening and intellectualizing of the Irish drama. O'Flaherty is the one writer with a great popular gift who has attempted the same for the Irish novel. For anything comparable in power to the Puritan, I have to go back to certain chapters of John Bannon, and to parts in one or two of the longer novels of Carleton. And unlike Bannon and Carleton, O'Flaherty goes deep into the human soul. Indeed, I think that his The Puritan is the first Irish novel that isolated a moment of spiritual tragedy. It is grotesque to call any portion of this novel obscene. Certain degraded persons, men and women, are vividly described, and that the degradation of the hero may be made real. The book is an Irish tartuffe, hypocrisy. I think it is probable that if the censors were to examine their consciences, they would discover that those consciences were biased by the fact that the Puritan, in its external superficial aspect, is a satire on the movement which has produced the censorship board itself. From the point of view of that movement, their ban is wild folly, for it turns a lamp into a bomb. This book will come secretly into Ireland, go from man to man as if it belonged to some hidden religion. And if I am right in my belief that it is a great book, it will so travel for generations to come. I myself, however, am most concerned with the fact that the ban may have a very bad effect on O'Flaherty himself. Some years ago he wrote a novel of perhaps equal power, The Informer, and followed it with Mr. Gilhooly, a book more unequal but I think magnificent at moments. He found himself generally attacked and for some years produced nothing but open or disguised politics. When I read The Puritan, I said to myself and others, O'Flaherty has recovered himself. He has thrown polemics away. For even the external satirical element of this book is a legitimate part of his theme. I make this protest in part that I may assure him that he has the sympathy of every Irish writer, and that if he will go on ignoring the attack, he will have our gratitude as well. He is a great novelist, and no opposition can prevent him from doing much to mould the next two generations. Now that's Yeats, and that's Yeats being very strong about what he's saying and clear. And I think that Yeats goes up in my admiration in a sense for that. I hadn't known about that. And that's just utterly wonderful. However, to kind of go to the side of all of that, I was telling my daughter I was doing this talk, and that because I knew Liam so well, that you'd expect to hear something about Liam and the family, Liam and us and Liam. And in fact, Liam and Kitty became essentially like grandparents to our two oldest kids. Sarah, we christened Sarah. She changed her name at about the age of 19 in Germany to Sorika because it was a more attractive name. She reminded me that, in fact, Liam always called her Sorka, not Sorika, Sorka, which is the straightforward Irish version, and told her that she was not a Sarah, and that we should not have called her Sarah, right? And she tells me as well, when she changed the name with great difficulty, remembering that she wasn't Sarah any longer, right? I would say Sarah, Sorry, yeah. But she said, Liam never called her Sarah. He always called her Sorry. I'd forgotten that completely. And Kitty used to buy them animal crackers. I'd forgotten all this, and I don't pay attention to that. Chocolate on one side, a little box of them each, and Liam used to steal some from each of them all the time. Red was Liam's favourite colour, she reminded me. Once when she was a teenager, she was working for me organising, we published the letters of Liam O'Flaherty, and they're quite amazing, really, quite amazing, most of them up to Kitty. She was organising, the letters were all in envelopes and so on. She was trying to arrange them in sequences so that we could get the editing done and the publishing done. She was 15, something like that. And she came across a tissue napkin that she was about to throw into a waste paper bin, but for some reason opened it. And inside was a romantic note from Liam to Kitty underneath the logo of the Eiffel Tower. And I was trying to find the text of that before I came in, but it was something like, all my love, Kitty Pie, and we're here in the Eiffel Tower. I mean, that's not what something like that. Anyway, she tells me, Sorika tells me, that she raced into my room shouting that she discovered the most romantic love note ever. Funnily enough, Fergus, who's her brother and a year and a half younger, hasn't great memories of Liam as such, but authors are strange creatures for a publisher, right? I had an author who was very like Liam must have been. He was a world wanderer, he was antisocial. Now Liam would socialise, this guy wasn't, he wouldn't socialise. His name was Niall Quinn, a published a collection of short stories that were revolutionary in his time. It was called, and if it's in the library, if it's not get it, it should be. If it's in the library, it's called Voyevich and Other Stories by Niall Quinn. Absolutely wonderful stories about German guest workers and so on, right? He was he was a big fan of O'Flaherty. But he used to communicate with me on his travels by sending postcards to Fergus. Sorry, can you get it? So awfuls do their own thing in their own way. At Liam's funeral, when Liam died, we brought Sorrick and Fergus to the mortuary where the coffin was, the open coffin in St. Vincent's, and she brought a red rose to put in his hands, and tells me now that this was the first dead body she had seen. When I was growing up, right, we went to every single wake in the village, right? You know, we saw dead bodies from the beginning of the wedding straight. So Sorrick hadn't seen the dead body until this. Now she was only maybe 5, 6, you know. She was fascinated by the waxen touch of his hand, she said. When I lifted her up, she has to be lifted up. She had to put the rose into the coffin, right? And I'm quoting her now, I'm not, maybe she's inventing something, I'm quoting her, right? She said she was fascinated by the waxen touch of his hand because it was like the Raynaud's symptoms that she had on her fingers. Her fingers would go deadly white and stiff almost, right? The blood, the Raynaud's disease or whatever it's called, she had that, right? As a child, and she knew that, right? And anyhow, she insisted on putting the rose into the coffin, and as I lifted her up and put her up, she said she was crying and her tears fell on Liam, and she was so pleased about that, right? Which is interesting. If she hears this, she'll want to know why I didn't say other things, but I forget that, right? But so, in fact, I'm glad that we did bring her to see Liam. There was a second funeral. Kitty's funeral. Kitty died about 6 years after Liam. Liam died in 84, and Kitty died in 91, I think it was, yeah. And she'd been quite unwell for a while. She'd moved out and was living in, because there was a problem about the apartment, Mairead Nahair had bought it and needed somewhere to live, and Kitty was reluctant to move out. Kitty was just obviously locked into wanting to stay. Kitty had plenty of money. It wasn't an issue of money. Like, Kitty was wealthy. It wasn't an issue of money. But she would go, and it went to a court case, and I don't know why. I was out of the country when somebody phoned me to say, you know, if you can get the Evening Herald, you'll see the front page of the Herald, you know, Kitty Taylor was sort of evicted from the flat. It was quite sad, I think, in a way. Anyhow, she lived in the Burlington Hotel for the rest of her life, and she had 24-hour nursing and so on. When she died, her son Peter was the only family connection we had. Was Laura dead, Michael? Yes, Laura. Her sister Laura had died, yeah. So Peter had asked Peter what was happening, and he said, well, we're having the body brought straight back to, cremated and brought straight back to America for a service or whatever there. And I said, no, can we not have a bit of time in Dublin? Because I knew that the nursing group, there were about, I think it must have been 8 or 10 nurses in all who had been nursing her, and some of them had been nursing Liam as well, wanted to say farewell. I wanted to say farewell, and kids wanted to say farewell, and a number of other people did as well. So I organised a memorial service for her in a funeral home, I think it's Jennings, by the Five Lambs Cross on Union Street, and invited a small group to attend. At this stage we had 4 children. Sorrick and Fergus were now 11, 12, and then there was Cormac and Aileen who were 4, 12, 2 or 3, right? So they all came to the ceremony. And I discovered, when I again was looking at the truth of this, I discovered a letter I wrote to Peter telling him about that event. Now, read that here, because that kind of tells, in a sense, what happened there and the connection. Dear Peter, I thought you might like to have some information about the gathering we had last Saturday to be our final honour and our farewells to Kitty. I don't know Peter at all. I'm talking on the phone to him once. I thought that was the only thing. I'm very pleased and privileged to have been there and to have been able to make a statement in conducting the ceremony which reflected the thoughts and feelings of those friends of our present, as well as being a deeply felt personal tribute from me. If there was an afterlife, and if Kitty was listening in on the occasion, she wouldn't have heard anything that she doesn't already know about my feelings and thoughts on her and on our long relationship. But she might have smiled at some of the private happiness of this public statement. And she would certainly have been very happy that so many came to say farewell. Indeed, some of those whom I managed to contact in for the occasion, of those I contacted, all but 2 or 3 attended, and those few expressed a genuine disappointment at not being able to be there. The gathering was in a small funeral home near the city centre at 11 a.m. on Saturday. When I arrived in advance, Pegeen and Catherine Kennedy, who was the nursing, the person organising the nursing for, were already there, and we were able to say a brief prayer before the coffin was then closed and covered with floral wreaths. By 11 o'clock all had arrived, and we went into the room. The group included Pegeen, her stepsister Joyce, who had come over from London. Joyce died in 2010. A curious coincidence. I was in Maynooth, went to Maynooth to study to be a priest, it lasted 3 years, in 1961. And I was doing the piano with a man called Charles O'Callaghan, who was the music teacher there. And he organised for a group of us in that year to go to the RDS for a recital, a concert recital. A very famous pianist and somebody else were playing there. The name of the pianist was Joyce Rathbone. Right? And that turns out to be the first year that Kitty met her. And met Liam just after that. But that was Joyce, her stepsister Joyce, who came over from London. Catherine Kennedy, her husband, and a flock of nurses, some 7 or 8, some with spouses, all of whom clearly had great affection as well as respect for Kitty. Maureen Elliott, Liam's niece, Mairead phoned me the previous night to say that she was going into hospital on Monday, and Rory O'Hare, Grandad's son, Ken Morgan, her solicitor, her brother, and his brother. Maureen Howley, a friend of ours, regrettably unable to be there, was Irene Wolfe, who was a very close, probably her closest living friend before Irene moved to the Isle of Man 2 years earlier. From the literary world, Dr. Maurice Harman of the National University and his wife Maura, the writer and dramatist Julia O'Connor, Jerry O'Flaherty, a Joycean authority and writer, and the poet Micheál Shield, was represented by his wife, he was away. The sculptor Anthony Stone suited the bronze portrait of Liam and visited Kitty and had great admiration for her, regretted very much being unable to come. Margaret, my wife, and our 4 kids, the eldest was Sarah and Fergus, were favourites of Kitty and Liam since birth, really. They were brought up in prams that Kitty and Liam bought for Sarah. The prams survived the 4 of them. Of course, they were the best of prams, right? Asking what the brand was now, it was a good pram. Great admiration. The Graham the pram that Kitty was still in use. The younger 2 behave very much as babies do at such events. Aideen doing a bit of crying now and then, and Cormac pacing up and down beside the coffin with a broad smile on his face. The smile is still on his face, right? Never left it. All inside the door closed, I began a welcome and thanks for attending on my own behalf and yours, and I told the group of the service you and the family will have in November. I spoke for a short while on my relationship with Kitty and about Kitty and Liam as I knew them from 1975 to now. We then had a moment of silent thought of prayer. I then read 2 poems, one my own, There Is No Night, which Kitty had once said she liked, and one an extract from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and I don't know what the extract was. And I'd have to go and try and find out now. I've forgotten that completely. An extract from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I enclosed the text of both, so I obviously sent those to him. Catherine Kennedy then spoke for the nurses and for herself and painted a strong and loving picture of their relationship and regard and respect for Kitty. Now, Kitty was an amazing woman. She really was extraordinary. Not an intellectual by any means, and what she did was she took over the business management of Liam's work. I forgot what year, in the 40s, maybe 46, I think it might have been. And she in fact made sure that Liam got paid for what he did, and that people kind of responded when they were contacted and so on. She was really fantastic in that way. Very organised, very strong, very, very strong. Now she had an interesting background. One of her sort of great, whatever it would be, grandparents was Harding, the President of the United States, apparently the worst President of the United States ever. And Liam used to always say, whenever it came up like where Kitty was from or whatever, used to always say that, oh, he jumped in 1929, right? That her husband, who was a stockbroker, had jumped in 1969. Kitty would deny it, but never so fully as to clarify what might have happened. So I don't know. I don't know. Mike, you didn't hear anything? My brother Mike.
He jumped.
He jumped. I think he might have. My brother Mike is a priest in America, in New Jersey, and actually was very close to where Laura was, and used to meet Laura quite often. Laura came to, Laura had come to Dublin a few times, so I met her there as well. And she had a big house, I don't know how many hundred acres, like 3/4 of an hour from New York. And when she died, she left that to the state of New Jersey, which was really quite nice. So then, Calvin Kenny spoke for the nurses, of their relationship and regardless like for Kitty and herself, and for the woman who gave so much to Liam during the time she lost him too. Then I read the short story The Mermaid from the book of Liam's short story, which first brought me into contact with Kitty and Liam. Kitty liked the story very much, and I had read it in the flat to both of them frequently, in fact. And it was as well, of course, the story read at his final public reading in London during the Sense of Ireland exhibition, and he had a big crowd for that. He got a really huge round of applause for it. This all took about 10 minutes or so, and we finally had another moment of silence. We all waited outside as the coffin was taken to the house with 5 single red roses on it, and I remember saying goodbye, Kitty, as it drove away. We then went as a group to the nearby Northside Hotel, where we spent a couple of hours in the bar talking about Kitty and Liam, and I think that really was Kitty's wake. There really is no sadness in death at a great age, but I will miss her and my kids will. But we will also remember this woman of grace and dignity, and remember a relationship that never had a discord between us in those 15 years. And that actually is true. There was never a discord. I think I only once saw Kitty get a bit angry at something that somebody had done about her. But she would control it. She was a very gentle woman, but great determination. And to see her and Liam together, like we would go regularly to the Burlington Hotel, where we bring the kids, and Liam just loved the kids playing on the floor, right? Kitty and my wife Margaret might be talking about that, I might be half talking to Liam, and minding the kids about it. We'd have coffee or we'd have sandwich or whatever. And one day, and this is kind of the other side of Liam, one day we were sitting in a group, and there were maybe 1 or 2 other people with us, I'm not sure. I had my back to a group that had just come in, and Liam was sitting over there sort of facing me, and I'm not sure why. He wasn't engaged in anything particular at the time. He was drinking a glass of wine. Kitty used to lace his wine with water. And by the way, Liam was known for drinking a lot, but actually there's letters from the agent who was giving out to somebody saying, well, you know, it's not right to call him a drunk. He quit drink at 40, and he hasn't touched a drop since. And this is 2 years later or something like that. So he was able to control himself to get his writing done when he had to. But anyhow, I got a tap on the shoulder. Somebody said, is that Liam off the hot day? Whispered to me. And I said, yeah. I said, I'm a great fan of his. Could I go over and shake his hand? I said, yeah, no problem at all. So he walks around the back, right around the couch, around the back, and comes over to Liam and says, Mr. O'Flaherty, put out his hand. And Liam had a glass of wine in his hand. Put a glass of wine down there. I saw all of this down. He went down his hand, and he turned around. Bugger off. Bugger off. Just like that. Just like that. And then he turned back, picked up his glass, and carried on. I can't remember, but I think I must have got up and gone after the guy to try and explain something to him, right? So Liam did have that kind of instant, response sometimes. But I would always sort of say, well, yeah, he had reason perhaps, he had reason, he wasn't necessarily in control of that. So, and then I wanted to tell you all of this because because you know how we regarded Kitty and how we remembered her. I hope we can meet sometime. We never have some theatre. Thank you for promising me the letters from Liam to her that Kitty had wanted me to have, and they have ended up there in the thing, right? I think it was in the time running.
Yeah. You're about done. You're about done.
Am I about done? I'm not really started, but I can't go without telling you about the sculptures. Right? The one over there is a portrait sculpture of Liam by Anthony Stones. As a publishing of the Hottie, I became a kind of a gatekeeper. I'd get phone calls from journalists or writers or fans or people who wanted to meet Liam, and would I arrange that? So I was protecting myself as well. I didn't want to damage my relationship with Liam. by sort of, introducing people whom I wouldn't know or whatever, right? So these phone calls came from New Zealand, and I wouldn't take them, and I would separately take them. And one day I took it by accident, and this guy said who he was, and he wanted to do a sculpture, portrait sculpture of him. I thought he was a sculptor, and I said, why? I said, well, when he was 17, his parents, his mother was Irish, his father was English, his parents were migrating from somewhere in the north of England to New Zealand, because his father was a dyer, and this was after the war, and there was no jobs for dyers anymore, but there was in New Zealand. So they said, more than people trade with John Well. So they went to New Zealand. On his way out to New Zealand, what he had was a collection of O'Flaherty's short stories. And he just fell in love with O'Flaherty. He became a designer in New Zealand TV. He did lots of sculpture, literary sculptures. So I said, okay, well, talk to me, sometime you're over on this side of the world. And he said, oh, I am on this side of the world. I've moved to Oxford because I want to do sculpting full time. So I said, okay, I'll see if Liam would agree. I mean, Liam would agree to almost anything I asked him. I knew he would agree, just because he wanted that time. The day came, and I was in my office in Mountjoy Square, not Marion Square, Mountjoy Square, 64 steps up, and this guy arrived up. Big, tall, 6-foot, baldy guy with a shock of white hair, right? And young man, carrying a wooden stand, somewhat like this, right? And looking quite unkempt. And I said, oh my God, what have I let myself into, right? Because the first thing he said was, where in Dublin can you get clay? It was quite the head of us on. Anyhow, we drove up, we got the clay in Kennedy's in Harper Street, and went over in to meet them. And Liam was in very good form that day. This is only a couple of years before